I thought I could handle everything on my own. But after losing Rocky, I realized I was wrong. I pushed everyone away, thinking I didn't need anyone. But the truth is I do. Now I'm learning that healing isn't about being perfect. It's about finding the strength to let go of the past and embrace what comes next. And maybe, just maybe, I'm ready to try. Before we dive into this powerful story, let us know where you're tuning in from. And if you find it compelling, don't forget to hit subscribe. The morning sun streamed through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the room. The day I've been waiting for, my wedding day, had finally arrived. I could hardly believe it. A mixture of excitement, anticipation, and nervous energy buzzed in my chest. Today, I would marry David, the man I loved more than anything. The thought should have filled me with overwhelming joy, but there was a nagging feeling in my stomach, a discomfort I couldn't quite shake. I glanced at the clock, 7:30 a.m. The day was already unfolding at a brisk pace. My mother's voice echoed from the hallway, reminding me to hurry up. The bridal party would be arriving soon, and everything had to be perfect. But as I stood there in front of the mirror, adjusting my veil, something didn't feel right. Something was missing. I walked to the window and stared outside, watching as the morning mist lifted over the lawn. The view was beautiful, but it was the familiar thumping sound from downstairs that pulled me back to reality. Rocky. My heart clenched. I could hear his faint whines, the noise he made when he was anxious or sick. I had tried to dismiss it, convinced that it was just pre-wedding nerves, but I couldn't ignore him. Not today, not now. I turned toward the door, heading down the stairs two at a time. My mother looked up from where she was arranging flowers on the table. Her face lit up with a smile. "Everything's going to be perfect, Chloe. You'll see." I nodded, trying to smile back, but the thought of Rocky grew louder in my mind. "Mom, I'm just going to check on Rocky. I'll be right back." She waved me off with a casual glance. "You don't need to worry about him. Your aunt's here, and he's been fed. Everything's fine." But was it? My heart raced as I hurried down the hallway toward the living room, where Rocky always liked to rest. There he was lying on the rug, his body stiff and unmoving. I knelt beside him, gently running my fingers through his fur, but his eyes remained distant, like he was somewhere else entirely. I could feel his breath slowing. The fear that had settled in my chest made my hands tremble. "Rocky," I whispered, but he didn't respond. The tears I had held back all morning finally fell, as I realized the truth I had been trying so hard to ignore. My best friend, my companion for over a decade, was getting worse. I pressed my forehead against his, my heart heavy with a growing sense of loss. This wasn't how I imagined this day going. I had always known that this moment would come, the moment when Rocky was no longer with me, but I hadn't thought it would be on my wedding day. I should be happy today, celebrating with friends and family, but instead, all I could think about was Rocky. I closed my eyes, allowing myself a few more moments of quiet grief. He had always been there for me, comforting me through breakups, career changes, and the loneliness that had defined so many of my early years. But now, he was here in his final moments, and I was about to leave him behind. The sound of the doorbell snapped me back to reality. The bridesmaids were here. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my robe, trying to compose myself. My mother was right. Everything had to be perfect. There was no time for grief. Not today. But as I stood up to head back upstairs, a thought lingered in my mind. Could I really leave him like this? I barely noticed the soft hum of the car as we made our way through the winding streets, heading towards St. Mary's Chapel. My mother, who was sitting next to me, was talking nonstop, offering last-minute advice about how to hold myself during the ceremony, the best way to smile for the photos, and how to greet guests at the reception. But all I could focus on was the feeling that something was horribly wrong. I tried to force a smile, to nod and reassure her that everything was going according to plan, but my mind kept drifting back to Rocky. I couldn't shake the image of him lying motionless on the floor, his eyes glazed over in that way that told me everything I didn't want to admit. The phone call from my aunt earlier had only confirmed what I feared. Rocky wasn't getting any better. She had said she would keep an eye on him, but her voice had cracked, betraying the worry she was trying to hide. "Chloe, are you listening?" My mom asked, her voice drawing me back into the present. Yes, sorry, I said, blinking rapidly, trying to focus. I'm listening. My mom didn't seem convinced, but she didn't press it. Instead, she smiled at me, her eyes sparkling with pride. It's a big day, sweetheart. You should be so happy. Everything's going to be wonderful. I nodded, but a knot tightened in my chest. If only I could just let go of this constant sense of unease. If only I could forget about Rocky for just a moment. We passed by familiar streets, the same ones I had walked down 100 times before, and yet today they seemed foreign to me. The world outside the car felt so distant, like I was watching it from behind a foggy window. I couldn't focus on anything. What my mom was saying, the upcoming ceremony, or even the beautiful spring day that had turned the whole town into a sea of blooming flowers and sunshine. Nothing mattered. All I could think about was my dog. I forced myself to glance at my phone, hoping there would be a message from my aunt or my sister. Maybe some good news. But no, there was nothing new. Only the message from earlier that said, Rocky's not doing well. We need to talk. I quickly typed a response, my fingers shaking, but just as I hit send, my mother's voice broke through my thoughts again. Chloe, look at you. You're so beautiful today. I remember when you were just a little girl, dreaming of your wedding day. Now here it is. I'm so proud of you. Her words should have made me feel warm, but instead, I just felt empty. I knew she meant well, but I didn't feel the excitement she was expecting me to have. All I wanted was to be with Rocky, to hold him and tell him everything would be okay, even though I knew it wouldn't. Thanks, Mom, I said, my voice quieter than I intended. I'm really nervous. Her gaze softened, and for a moment, I thought she might sense the unease in me. But then, she straightened, her smile returning. Of course you're nervous, sweetie. But don't worry. Once you see David, everything will feel right. It's your day to shine. I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was looming, just beyond my reach. The church loomed ahead, its towering steeple cutting into the sky. We had arrived. The moment was here. My wedding day. But inside, I felt torn, pulled between two worlds. The one where I was supposed to be celebrating a new chapter of my life with David, and the one where my heart ached for my dog, for the companion who had been by my side through thick and thin. As I stepped out of the car, the cool breeze kissed my face, a welcome change from the hot, suffocating air of the car. My heels clicked sharply on the pavement as we made our way toward the church doors. The guests had already begun to arrive, their murmurs of excitement and joy mixing with the sound of wedding music playing softly in the background. But as I walked up the steps, my heart was still with Rocky. I glanced back at the car. It seemed ridiculous, but I half expected to see my aunt pull up any second with Rocky by her side, wagging his tail as if nothing had happened. But of course, that wasn't going to happen. Chloe, stop worrying, my mom said as she squeezed my arm. This is your day, and it's going to be perfect. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But as we entered the church, I felt as though I was walking through a dream, one I couldn't quite understand. I was here, and yet I wasn't. I just hoped that by the time the ceremony was over, I could finally make peace with the moment. I needed to, because I couldn't shake the fear that I had already lost something important, something that would never come back. The moment I stepped into the church, the grandeur of the place hit me all at once. The soft echo of the organ filled the space, vibrating in my chest like the steady beat of my heart. Everything was so perfect. The flowers, the music, the guests. It was everything I had dreamed about for years. And yet, all I could feel was a deep emptiness in the pit of my stomach. The aisle stretched out before me like a road I wasn't sure I wanted to walk down. Every step I took toward the altar felt like a mile, each one heavier than the last. My mom's arm was linked through mine, guiding me as I forced my legs to move. I glanced at her face, beaming with pride, and it only made me feel worse. How could I be so disconnected from everything around me when this was supposed to be the happiest day of my life? As the soft murmur of the guests faded into silence, I met David's eyes. He was standing there, looking incredibly handsome in his black tuxedo, a soft smile playing at the corners of his lips. His eyes were filled with excitement, And for a moment, I thought I saw something else there too, something like doubt. But I dismissed the thought quickly. David was everything I had ever wanted, wasn't he? I took a deep breath and looked away. You're doing great, my mother whispered beside me, giving my arm a gentle squeeze. He's waiting for you. But the truth was, I wasn't sure I was ready. How could I be when my heart was somewhere else entirely? We finally reached the altar, and I stood beside David, my hands trembling slightly as I placed them in his. He looked at me with warmth in his eyes, squeezing my hands reassuringly. I tried to smile, but it felt forced. The Reverend's words echoed around us, ceremonial and beautiful, but I didn't hear them. My mind kept drifting, like a kite tugged by an invisible wind, back to Rocky. What if something happens to him? What if I'm making the wrong choice? The questions circled in my mind, distracting me at every turn. I tried to push them down, telling myself that once this ceremony was over, I could be with him. I could take care of him. But was it too late? I glanced toward the back of the church, half expecting to see my aunt walk in with Rocky in her arms, maybe a little tired but still alive, still with me. But there was no sign of her, no sign of him, just the faces of family and friends, smiling at me with adoration. My pulse quickened, and I fought to focus. The Reverend was asking if I took David to be my lawfully wedded husband. A simple question, but it felt like a trap. A choice I couldn't make without feeling guilty. I do, I whispered, my voice barely audible. David squeezed my hand again, his smile widening, and for a brief moment, I felt the weight of the moment. I had committed to him. I had said the words. I was now bound to him, for better or worse. But the doubt remained. The vows were next. David spoke as first, and I barely heard a word. My mind was elsewhere, trapped in the turmoil of my own emotions. When it was my turn, I looked down at my hands, trying to steady myself, but I couldn't. The words felt foreign, rehearsed, and distant. I promise to love you. I began, the words getting stuck in my throat. I promise to stand by you. Through all things, in sickness and in health. I trailed off. The thought of sickness was too much for me to bear. It wasn't David who I was thinking about as I said those words. It was Rocky. I couldn't help it. The guilt, the fear, it surged forward, breaking through every wall I had tried to build around myself. What kind of wife would I be if I couldn't even commit to the most important person in my life? If I couldn't be there for Rocky when he needed me most? The Reverend looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to finish my vows. But I couldn't. My heart wasn't in it. Not right now. I'm sorry, I whispered, my voice trembling. I can't. David's face faltered, the smile slipping from his lips. His eyes filled with confusion and hurt, but there was no time to explain. I turned on my heel and ran. The echo of my footsteps was deafening as I hurried out of the church, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The world outside was blurry, the weight of the moment too much for me to handle. I needed to be with Rocky. I needed to know he was okay. I wasn't sure where I was going or what I was doing, but all I could think about was him. I had promised to love him forever, too. I had always promised him that I wouldn't leave him, no matter what. The car was parked at the end of the driveway, and I nearly threw open the door before jumping inside. My phone was buzzing, the screen lighting up with my aunt's number. "Chloe," she said when I answered, her voice shaking. "It's time. You need to come home. He's gone." The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the steering wheel, fighting back tears. He was gone. I had missed my chance to say goodbye. The car engine rumbled beneath me, a steady hum that couldn't drown out the whirlwind inside my head. I barely remembered the drive back home, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. My aunt's words still echoed in my ears. He's gone. I didn't want to believe it. I refused to believe it. How could I? I had left the church, the happiest day of my life, for him. For Rocky. But now it was too late. I pulled into the driveway, the familiar surroundings only deepening the ache in my chest. My childhood home looked the same as it always did, peaceful, serene, but inside, everything had changed. Everything had shattered. I hurried out of the car, my legs shaking beneath me as I approached the front door. My aunt stood there, her face pale and drawn. She had tried to hide it, but the grief was written all over her. I could see it in her eyes. She had lost him too. "Chloe," she said quietly, stepping aside to let me in. "I'm so sorry." I barely registered her words. I moved past her and toward the living room, where the heavy silence settled around us like a thick blanket. The scent of his favorite dog shampoo still lingered in the air, the smell of his bed and toys scattered across the floor. I could hear the faint echoes of his bark in my memory, the joyful sound of him running toward me every time I walked through the door. But there was nothing now. Nothing but the emptiness of it all. I sank to my knees beside his bed, my hands trembling as I ran my fingers over the soft fabric where he used to lay. The room felt cold without him in it. I could still see the way his tail wagged when I spoke to him, the way he always leaned into me for comfort, as if he knew when I needed it most. "I'm so sorry, Rocky," I whispered through tears. "I never should have left you. I should have stayed." I wanted to scream, to demand why this had to happen, but the words wouldn't come. I felt as though I was drowning in my own guilt. How had I been so selfish, so blind to the time slipping away? I had focused on the future, on the perfect life I thought I was supposed to build with David, and in doing so, I had lost the one thing that had always loved me unconditionally. My aunt sat next to me, wrapping her arms around my shoulders. She didn't need to say anything. We both knew what we had lost. She had been there when he had taken his last breath, her voice thick with sadness as she called me, hoping that somehow I would make it in time. But it hadn't been enough. "I should have been here," I repeated, my voice breaking. "I should have been here for him." "You couldn't have known, Chloe. It wasn't your fault," my aunt said softly, her voice soothing but still heavy with sadness. "You did everything you could for him. He was loved. You gave him a good life. But it didn't matter. The truth was I had failed him. Rocky had been there for me when no one else was. He had been my companion through every lonely night, my confidant through the darkest times. And now he was gone. Forever." I stood up, my legs unsteady as I walked toward the door, needing to feel the fresh air, needing to escape the suffocating grief that was choking me inside. I stepped out onto the front porch, the cool breeze against my skin doing little to ease the ache inside me. I stood there, staring out at the world as if everything should have stopped, as if time should have frozen in this moment of loss. The sounds of the world around me seemed so distant, like I was hearing them through water. I didn't know how to keep going. How could I? Without Rocky? Without the one thing that had given me a sense of grounding, a sense of home? I sat on the porch swing, my eyes blurry with tears. I could still see him in my mind's eye, his wagging tail, his warm eyes, his soft fur under my fingertips. He had given me so much, and now I was left with nothing. But then I realized something. I wasn't the only one who had lost him. David had lost him too. I hadn't told him about Rocky's condition. I hadn't shared the full story. I had kept it all to myself, thinking I could carry the burden alone. But now, in the stillness of the moment, I knew the truth. I had shut him out. I had shut everyone out. I had made a choice that had affected more than just me. David was part of this, and if I truly wanted to move forward, I needed to fix it. I needed to share the pain with him. I needed to make things right. I stood up and wiped my eyes, taking a deep breath. It wasn't going to be easy, and I didn't know where to start. But I had to. For David, for me, for Rocky's memory. I had to try. I glanced at the phone in my hand, knowing that David was probably trying to reach me. I had ignored his calls all afternoon. Now it was time to face him, to explain everything, to make him understand. I took one last look around the yard. The trees swayed gently in the wind, the flowers were still in bloom, and the world was continuing on, oblivious to my grief. But I wasn't alone. I had to remember that. I wasn't alone. The phone rang twice before I finally answered. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I wasn't sure I had the strength to speak. But I had to. I needed to do this. "Chloe." David's voice crackled through the line, strained but gentle. "Are you okay?" I swallowed hard, my throat tight with emotion. I didn't know how to explain everything to him. The loss of Rocky, my guilt, the loneliness I felt in a world that seemed to be moving without me. But I had to try. I, I'm sorry, I said, my voice shaky. I didn't mean to shut you out. It's just, I'm not okay right now. Rocky, he's gone. And I didn't want to burden you with it. I thought I could handle it alone. There was a long pause on the other end, and I could almost hear David processing my words, the weight of them sinking in. I wish you'd told me, he finally replied. His voice was soft but firm, tinged with the hurt of the distance I had put between us. I care about you, Chloe. I want to be there for you. You don't have to carry all of this by yourself. The tears threatened to spill again, but I fought them back. I had been so focused on my own grief, so convinced that I could manage it alone, that I had forgotten the one thing that had always been true between us. David was there for me. And I had pushed him away. I'm sorry, I repeated, my voice cracking. I didn't mean to push you away. I've just been so caught up in everything, and I didn't know how to talk about it. David sighed, a sound of both frustration and understanding. I get it, Chloe. I do. But you don't have to go through this alone. I'm here. We're a team, remember? His words hit me like a wave. A part of me had feared that if I opened up, if I let him in, it would somehow make everything feel worse. But instead, it felt like a weight was lifting off my chest, like the possibility of healing was finally within reach. I don't know what to do, I admitted, my voice small. I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know if I can fix it. We don't have to fix everything right now, David said gently. We can just take it one step at a time. You don't have to have all the answers. Just let me be there for you. I closed my eyes, my heart swelling at the kindness in his voice. I had been so lost in my own pain that I had forgotten the power of simply being heard, of sharing that burden with someone who cared. I don't deserve you, I whispered, barely believing the words as they left my lips. David's response was immediate. Don't say that. You're everything to me, Chloe. I care about you more than you know, and I'm not going anywhere. His words were like a balm to my fractured heart. I had spent so long trying to convince myself that I didn't need anyone, that I could handle everything on my own. But David was right. I didn't have to go through this alone. I've been so scared, I confessed, my voice trembling with vulnerability. Scared that if I let someone in, they'll leave. That if I let myself feel anything, it will hurt too much. But now I see that pushing people away only makes it worse. David's voice softened even more. It's okay to be scared, Chloe. We all are sometimes, but you don't have to face it alone. I'm here, and I always will be. The tears that had been threatening to spill finally fell, not from sadness, but from relief. For the first time in days, I felt the smallest flicker of hope. David wasn't just offering me his words. He was offering me his heart, his presence, and his understanding. And for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could let him in. Thank you, I whispered, wiping my eyes. Thank you for not giving up on me. I never would, he replied, his voice steady and sincere. I love you, Chloe. I'm not going anywhere. I let out a shaky breath, the weight of everything still heavy, but a little more bearable now. I love you too, David. I'm sorry for everything, for pushing you away. But I want to make it right. I want to try. Together. There was a pause, and I could hear the smile in his voice when he spoke again. We'll take it one step at a time, Chloe. Just like you said, we'll figure it out together. And for the first time since Rocky's passing, I felt like I wasn't carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders alone. I had someone who truly understood, someone who was willing to walk with me through the pain, the uncertainty, and the healing. Together, we would face this. Together, we would find our way. The day we planned to visit Rocky's grave felt surreal. It was the first time I had let myself think about him in a way that wasn't filled with anger or guilt. As much as I missed him, the overwhelming emotions I'd felt in the days after his passing had only brought more pain, more questions, more what-ifs. I had to face this final goodbye, to truly begin healing. David drove us to the cemetery, his presence steady beside me. It was a quiet drive, neither of us speaking much, as though the words didn't seem necessary. The air was heavy, thick with the kind of sadness that only deep love could bring. I thought about all the times I had stood in that very spot, just me and Rocky. He He was more than just a pet. He was a friend, a protector, my constant companion when life felt too hard. How do you say goodbye to something that meant so much? We pulled into the gravel lot, and I could see the patch of land where Rocky was buried, a simple wooden marker standing in silent tribute. My heart beat faster. The last time I'd been here, I'd been too numb to truly absorb what had happened. Today, I had no choice but to face it. David gently squeezed my hand, as though to reassure me. "Whenever you're ready, Chloe." I nodded, but my throat was tight, too tight to speak. Slowly, I climbed out of the car and walked toward the grave, each step heavier than the last. As I reached it, I knelt down, my knees digging into the soft earth. My hands trembled as I traced the edges of the wooden marker with my fingers. "I'm sorry," Rocky whispered. "I failed you. I wasn't there when you needed me most. I was selfish, and now you're gone." The words came out like a broken sob, and I felt David's hand on my shoulder, a silent comfort in his touch. For a few moments, I just sat there, letting the tears fall. I had to let them fall. Holding them back had been the easy way, but now it felt like the only way forward was through this pain, through the release. I could almost hear Rocky's playful bark in the back of my mind, as if he were reminding me that it was okay to hurt, but it was also okay to heal. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm within me. There was no undoing what had happened, no erasing the guilt or the regret. But there was a chance for me to change, to be someone who could finally forgive herself, to stop carrying the weight of what was beyond my control. I should have been there, buddy, but I couldn't do it alone. I paused, struggling to find the right words. "But I'm learning. I'm trying, Rocky. I really am." David's voice broke through the silence. "Chloe, he knows. He always knew how much you loved him." I looked up at him, meeting his eyes. I just feel like I should have been better. A better owner, a better person. David knelt down beside me, his gaze soft. "You were there for him in ways that most people aren't for their pets. He knew he was loved, Chloe. He didn't need you to be perfect. He just needed you to be you." I let those words settle in my heart. For the first time since his death, I felt like I could forgive myself just a little. Rocky had always been there for me in ways I didn't even realize until now. His love was unconditional, his loyalty unwavering. I had been the one who was too caught up in my own grief to see it. I turned back to the grave, a final tear slipping down my cheek. "I miss you, buddy, but I promise I'll be okay. I'll carry your love with me, and I'll learn from my mistakes." David stood beside me, his presence grounding me. "We're going to be okay. You're not alone in this." I nodded, wiping my eyes. The moment wasn't over, not yet, but it felt like the weight of the past was beginning to lift. Saying goodbye to Rocky wasn't the end of my grief. It was the beginning of healing, of taking the first steps toward becoming the person I was meant to be. Someone who could forgive herself, someone who could let go of the guilt and embrace the lessons Rocky had left behind. As we stood up, I felt the first flutter of peace in my chest. It wasn't a sudden relief, but a quiet understanding that this was just the start. The road to healing was long, but I wasn't alone anymore. We stood there for a moment longer, just the three of us, David, Rocky, and me, before turning to leave. I wasn't sure where the road would take me, but I knew that as long as I kept moving forward, there was hope for the future. And maybe that was enough for now.